I think the only other country that even comes close might be Sweden or France.
Okay. And you also mentioned that Japan, as far as the economic industrial base, they've made agreements with the U.S., which is likely to sort of take them under their wing in this era of deglobalization.
No one takes Japan under their wing. Japan's too big.
Fair.
But Japan has gone out of their way to strike a series of deals with both sides of the political aisle in the United States. So when you look at things from the American point of view, we like the Brits, we like the Aussies, most days we like the Kiwis, and of course, Canada's along for the ride. That's the Anglo Alliance. And we're in the process of wrapping our minds around the fact that Mexico is as much family as Canada is, and we're getting there.
Right, yeah.
Japan found a way to buy themselves into that inner circle. They're the only country that we didn't approach. They approached us, and they found a way to make it work. That hasn't been done before, and I don't know if it's replicable, but it is a hell of an achievement.
Then, so let's talk about Taiwan. Where does Taiwan fit into this potential arrangement, or what do the fates have in store for Taiwan as far as economic or demographic issues?
So Taiwan has a little bit more elbow room than either Japan or Korea per capita, and as a result, their demographic slide has not been as abrupt. In addition, they started industrializing and urbanizing a good decade and a half before the Koreans, so they've had a little bit more time to adjust. Now, it's still on a sharply negative track, but if you think of the Koreans as having a big bulge in their demographics in the 60s, with the Taiwanese, it's in the 40s. So even if all of the negative trends in the aging and the urbanization and the low birth rates continue, it's still going to be another 20 to 30 years before Taiwan is in a Korea-style situation. And that means barring, nukes and wars and all that good stuff, that Taiwan is definitely, of the Northeast Asian four, the one that's going to last the longest.
Good news for Taiwan. The potential of conflict in the Taiwan Strait, given China's serious political and social problems and the general deglobalization going on, is conflict more or less likely in your view, let's say in the next few years?
I think conflict is less likely. When a country decides that they want to invade a neighbor, they don't just wake up on an idle Thursday and throw the switch. They plan for it. They build their military around it. It takes years, if not decades, of planning. And in doing it that way, countries have to make certain assumptions that guide their planning as they reshape their militaries for the task at hand. In the case of the People's Republic of China, there are four big assumptions. Assumption one is that the war would be easy. And then they look at the Ukraine war and they realize that the Ukrainians only had 8 years to prepare, whereas Taiwan has had 45. And you can walk to Kiev, but you have to swim to get to Taipei. So, assumption one's out the window. Assumption two, Russian weaponry is great. So let's steal all the IP from the Russians, buy the floor models, reverse engineer them, and then build out our own versions of them and equip our soldiers with $3 trillion worth of new gear. And they're now having some serious buyer's remorse because Russian weaponry in the field is just not performing. Assumption number three, no one will care. Once we launch the war, everyone will just stand back, let it happen, and then just admit that this is the new reality and they'll just deal with it. The Russians are now under more sanctions than all countries in all regions throughout human history. And if you were to take the same sanctions that are on the Russians, put them on the Chinese, oh my God. I mean, Russia's a flawed system. It's corrupt. It's inefficient. But it's a massive producer and exporter of food and energy. China is the world's largest importer of both, and it imports 80% of the inputs that allows it to grow its own food. You take the sanctions that are on Russia, put them on Beijing, and you get a deindustrialization collapse complete with a famine in less than 6 months. So everything that the Chinese thought they were preparing for has fallen apart, but it's the fourth one, I think, that really terrifies the Politburo. The idea of the boycotts, not the sanctions, just companies deciding to walk away from hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in the Russian space, expecting no compensation, just deciding this is not what we want to be part of. There is no concept of citizen agency in Beijing, certainly not at the top. They don't even have a way to process this. So every assumption that they have made for 40 years, they now know is wrong. And they don't even have the capacity intellectually to start over because they don't have the people who can think outside of the box at all.
But there's the issue that you've already mentioned is if Xi Jinping gets the idea into his head, is there anyone there that would, say no?
There is not, and that is the risk. Is that if Xi or an overeager bureaucrat just decided to pull the trigger just because, the war would happen. It would be the end of modern industrialized unified China. I have no doubt about that. Yeah. But if you're like me and you think that for demographic, financial, and strategic reasons that the Chinese system is in its final years anyway, then there's something to be said for choosing the time and the place and the nature of the conflict so that you can at least write the local history version of it. And that might just be enough for the CCP to remain in power. And if you can do that for the low price of 300 to 500 million dead Chinese, it just might be worth it.
Yeah, it's a scary thought. I recently saw a video of yours where you discussed how the U.S. is slowly sort of pulling away from this the global trade order that's been established over the last 50, 60 years. And you mentioned that it might take a serious national security scare that would bring U.S. interests back towards an idea of we need to keep our investment in this global order. Would Taiwan meet that criteria if there were a conflict?
I don't think so. If we have a war in Taiwan, obviously the world is going to lose its top-end semiconductors, but that's a relative. The 10 nanometer and smaller semiconductors that Taiwan dominates, it's 80% of production globally. It's a small sliver of the market. You're talking about less than 5% of the total. And that we're probably going to lose anyway. One of the things about semiconductors that most people don't realize is the degree to which it's an ecosystem. So the wafers, as a rule, come from Japan, and some of the machinery from Korea, and the designs from the United States, and the lithography from the Netherlands, and the lenses for the lithography from the Germans, and the lasers for the lithography from California. You get the idea. Yeah. It takes a village. Okay. And if one piece of that falls out, Taiwan's done. Because there's no one out there who can replace it. This is the result of 50 years of industrial specialization in a dozen different locations. There's no backup. That's one of the reasons why when the Biden administration decided to kill the Chinese semiconductor sector, it was so easy because it only took one country removing support. And now with the Dutch and the Japanese online, it's three. So, it really is over. Now there's an asterisk there. There's, papers that you can write on the details. Yeah. But this sort of environment that allowed us to push the boundaries where Taiwan was the forge that brought all these pieces together, this was never going to last. Okay. So the Taiwanese semiconductor industry in its current form will not last regardless of the overall American position. Okay. So, enjoy it while you can. And always keep in mind, you can use top-end fab facilities to make non-top-end wafers and semiconductors. So it's not that semiconductors are going to vanish from Taiwan, but the pushing the boundary, as have become used to associating Taiwan with, that is very close to the end and was going to be close to the end regardless of what happened with the United States or a war with Taiwan, a war with China. For the United States to be sufficiently scared to pick up the mantle of global leadership again, it's got to be something that can theoretically hurt the mainland. So 9/11, of course, was the excellent example, because if it wasn't for 9/11, we would have been on this path 15 years ago.
Makes sense.